Online.
Hello everyone, and welcome to our stream, What is Happening in Russia? Almost 4 months have passed since the start of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. We thought it would be interesting for our listeners to hear a discussion, some questions, and topics on this subject. In today's stream, we intend to discuss topics such as how sanctions have affected daily life in Russia, the state of the Russian communist movement, given the current state of affairs, and many other important questions. My name is Kevin. I'm a member of PolishStorm. I'm joined by Comrade Vasily from our Russian and international section. I'm glad that he's taken the time to discuss the situation with us. Welcome, Vasily.
Good evening to our viewers from Europe. Good afternoon to our audience from the US East Coast. And I guess good morning to those who watch the stream from the Western Coast.
All right. So now that we've introduced the participants in today's discussion, we've generally laid out what we're going to talk about today. Let's proceed to the first topic that we have on the agenda. Vasily, so just to lay the groundwork, can you just briefly describe the course of events leading up to the special military operation in Ukraine and just what effect it's had on the working people in Russia?
Yes. So first things first, some of our viewers may notice that Kevin talks about special military operation. And big thanks to Kevin for actually saying this thing, because here in Russia we're actually prohibited from saying war about this conflict. Like literally, it's prohibited by law. There were laws adopted in March and April this year, where if you say those words in mass media about the ongoing events, the government is able to arrest you, and they're gonna take around 30 from 30 to 200,000 rubles, and this sum of money is very huge for an average Russian worker. So these events are very interesting because they were in front of my eyes, basically. It all started basically in December and January. There were Russian war games near Ukrainian border, and I remember there were a lot of talks about those exercises. Russian propagandists were making fun of people abroad. They were laughing in radio, television. They said, haha, you stupid Westerners, you think we're gonna invade someone? No, we're actually just making war games. Then there were those events in Kazakhstan in January 2022. I guess some people heard about them. Well, that was kind of unpredicted. They started when there were New Year holidays in Russia. They last for a week, starting with December 31st and ending on January 7th. And yeah, they took place during this time, and it was kind of unexpected. But then everything became calm, and the attention of the mass media slowly returned to those war games. Then there were news rumors firstly, and then news about the so-called evacuation, when a lot of people from Donbas region were evacuated in Russia. And well, looking from today's point of view, it's kind of obvious they evacuated people to start the escalation. However, during that time, it was kind of unknown. On February 21st, if I remember correctly, Putin said Russia is going to recognize the so-called Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics. However, it basically didn't make any sense because it was just technically like the euro. Because de facto Russia had relations with those republics for a long period of time, back in 2014. You know, those two regions in the east of Ukraine, they could not held longer without this great support from its eastern ally. There were a lot of people, equipment, ammunition, and so-called volunteers sent. There were also different cases throughout this time, from 2014 to 2021, when this or that event showed that there are actually Russian soldiers in this part, in those regions. They were even in 2021. There was one case when there was a military court in Rostov who they said some people spent too much money on this or that stuff for Russian soldiers based in those people's republics, and when those news got into mass media, they of course deleted all those things. However, the fact is here. And I can also tell about the cultural communication. It's well known that there were a lot of conferences, a lot of events held in Russian universities where where students from Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics were able to join. There were a lot of them actually, not just students but also their teachers, teaching staff. That's it. And well, I remember the day. It was February 23rd. Red Army Day. I was going in bed, and everything seemed to be normal. However, the next day I woke up. It was around 7 a.m. and the first thing I saw in the news when I opened my phone is this Putin speech in 4 a.m. claiming that there is a neo-Nazi Ukrainian Kiev government, and Russia can wait no longer. They're gonna start the so-called special military operation to prevent Ukraine from becoming anti-Russia. That's what they say.
Gotcha. All right. And is that just generally the pretext of the entire special military operation, is preventing Ukraine from becoming anti-Russia, and is that just more closely aligned with, NATO countries, or can you just elaborate on what that means?
Well, there is it's been for a while. They've always talked about NATO threat, expansion on the east, and it's no wonder they used it in the first place. So there were a lot of talks about Ukraine joining NATO, about Ukraine joining the European Union. It's well known that this goal was set up in their constitution back in 2014 after Euromaidan coup. And the thing is that actually there were no there were no parts to start with. Ukraine had no any foundations to become a member of European Union or NATO, and in Russia it was mainly used to justify military hysteria, militarization. Russian military complex works well. It works almost as the American one. They also get a lot of profits. They send weapons everywhere. Mostly it's of course eastern part, like China, India, those things. And of course they needed an enemy to justify the growth of military production, to justify all the actions of the Russian government. Even those events with Crimea, which took place back in 2014, they were justified by the Russian government. Their theory, they talked a lot about it in mass media. They said, if it was not up to our army, Crimean Peninsula would be invaded by the soldiers of NATO. And it's still alive.
Makes sense. All right. And I guess along those same lines, we've mentioned that this has been, the special military operations, it's called, has gone on for 4 months. Have there been any changes? Because at the beginning of the, back in February, beginning of March, many thought it wouldn't drag out for this long in terms of several months, due to Russian military superiority. Given that it seems like the objectives have changed, has the way that the Russian government sort of has presented the special military operation, has that changed at all, or has it just been consistent the entire time, regardless of what their stated objectives are?
Yeah, so firstly they claimed they gonna start the denazification and demilitarization process in Ukraine. In my opinion, their goal was to set up the satellite regime in Ukraine, and that's why they started with attacking the Kiev region first, because obviously there were fortifications built in Donbass for almost 8 years. So they started advancing from the north and from the south, where they got Kherson and part of Zaporozhye and Nikolaev regions under their control. I think our audience knows this fact that the Russian army managed to get Chernobyl under its control. There were a lot of jokes about Stalker, this game by one Ukrainian company, and they were they started fighting in Kiev. However, it quickly appeared that the Russian army is not able to take Kiev under its control. And this fact, in my opinion, is essential because from what I've seen in Russian mass media, in Russian Ministry of Defense briefings, they wanted to capture Kiev. Kiev is basically the capital. It's not just political capital, but also industrial, economical, and all those things. So they wanted the existing government, to collapse, and they wanted to someone from Ukrainian army, from Ukrainian establishment, to proclaim satellite regime, so that there was no need in storming those fortifications in Donbass. They actually managed to storm them in Mariupol, right now in Severodonetsk. And this plan they had, it basically failed. And it's not new. Back in 90s, when the Russian army was fighting in Chechnya, they had similar sentiments. One phrase by the Russian Minister of Defense, Pavel Grachev, is well known among Russian people. He said, we're gonna take Grozny with 2 paratroopers regiments by the new year, because they stormed it in last days of December 1994, and they failed. And we have similar fail here in Kiev, when they managed to fail to storm the city once again, and then they retreat from northern part. Now they're getting control in the southern regions. It's also worth mentioning that firstly I saw news about Kherson, about Zaporozhye, where Russian military administration claimed they won't make any referendums, they won't make any attempts to turn those regions into republics or to secede them from Ukraine. However, later they said, the people living in those lands, they don't want to stay in those filthy Ukrainian neo-Nazi territories. They want to join Russia. They are all Russians. They don't want to be with Zelensky. And now there are news about integrating Kherson and Zaporozhye into the Russian state.
Very interesting. Thank you, Vasily. So, along those same lines, can you talk about some of the just propaganda that's been, laid out there by the Kremlin, and just B, whether it's resonating with people, whether it, is having any effect?
Can you repeat, please?
Yeah. All I said was, can you just talk about essentially the propaganda campaign by the Russian government to justify the special military operation, and just how effective, in your view, has it been?
Of course, it's a very interesting topic. But before speaking about that, I want to ask our audience if they can help our project, because due to literally military censorship in Russia and Ukraine. Both our teams, well, Russians and Ukrainians, they have problems with supporting the project, like keeping the site online, stable, doing all the stuff necessary. So I would be glad if you help us by asking a question using this link, and this link will be published in the chat. And please use your credit cards or what you have. Don't use Google Pay, because Google Pay blocked working with Russia. They don't work with Russia, so we're not able to receive those money. And getting back to the topic, well, it's very interesting in case of looking how the opinion changes, how it changes almost immediately in one day. As I mentioned before, they said a lot of jokes about Russian war games. They said those stupid Westerners think we're gonna invade someone. Haha, it's so funny. It's a joke. We're just joking them. And then, just in one day, it changed to those stupid, in my opinion, things. Like they started saying, "Where have you been for 8 years? You say you're against this operation, so you want those children in Donbass to suffer from Ukrainian neo-Nazis," and all those things. And I basically dislike it because, well, those people back in 2014, well, I was a pupil, and the exact same people who were saying, "Where have you been for those 8 years?" They were saying back then, "We cannot intervene in those events because you want to fight with NATO. If we start this, NATO will join, and you will have to fight not just Ukraine but also the whole NATO. So it's fine when they don't support those people's republics." Now they're saying literally the thing that is greatly different from the previous one, and it's the same people who say that. It's Kiselyov, the director of Russia Today. It's Solovyov, one of the main Russian capitalist propagandists on TV channels and radio. It's Simonyan. She is the talking head of Russia Today. And in my opinion, it's kind of funny how a lot of Westerners, especially Western leftists, they unironically believe Russia Today. They think Russia Today is saying truth, it's opposing Western media, it's objective, it's independent. And the truth is that this agency is funded from the Russian budget, Russian state budget. And it means it's funded by the money Russian capitalists stole from the Russian workers. Now they're talking about how those Westerners suffer from lack of gas and oil, especially Europeans, how those stupid Americans want to support Ukraine, want to make it a real war. Well, I don't know what they mean by speaking about that. And well, as for the influence they have, well, the government leaves very few choices because, as I mentioned already, they adopted several laws which restrict saying it's a war, restrict saying any anti-military slogans. It applies to communists as well. Actually, there was one case when there were several communists arrested. It was created by federal agents, probably. And there was one Marxist club in Ufa. Ufa, it's Siberia. It's been existing for a while. They were just Marxist club. They were discussing different theoretical works, politics, and very soon they got some people who claimed they are volunteers from Donbass. those who fought there back in 2014. They accepted them. Those people started joining the club's meetings, and very soon they started to say, like, why do you sit there and read books? Let's make something practical. And by practical, they meant going in the countryside and blowing some strike ball grenades. However, in Russia, such actions are recognized by FSB, Federal State Security, as things that that can allow to form an extremist organization, and extremist is the one that opposes the existing power regime and wants to change it violently. That's extremism. And well, after those talks, after several such exercises, very quickly the state security arrested all the members of those of this club, and after that, an information was revealed that those so-called volunteers from Donbass, they were actually arrested by the state security in 2015. However, they managed to get out without any penalties. And of course, that it was kind of suspicious when those people go from the Russian state security with nothing bad. So what I can say is that well, the Russian propaganda is doing its best. They're being funded. They're getting paid, and of course, those things they influence the Russian people. A lot of people are basically brainwashed. They believe that Russia is fighting neo-Nazis there because there are actually neo-Nazis in Ukraine. However, one little fact that they don't like to mention is that there are neo-Nazis in Russia as well. And actually, they're fighting right now in Ukraine. There were some messages in Polishtom Twitter and Telegram about a lot of people from Russian army, from those People's Republic's armies that wear different neo-Nazi pagan symbols that say they are fighting for white children, and that's already kind of suspicious. And actually there were some news even from the Russian Orthodox Church. They were surprised with the fact that there are a lot of pagans in the higher establishment of the Russian military elites. Yes, there are a lot of people who enjoy all those neo-Nazi stuff, like flags, making tattoos. I actually know one of them in my city. It's in European part, and there were news about one famous local patriot going to fight neo-Nazis. And well, when I saw this well-known local patriot, I actually know he had a portrait of Hitler on his elbow. So yeah,
Oof.
that's what is called anti-fascists in Russia today.
Wow, that's extremely interesting. Well, thank you for laying all that out there, Vasily.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I definitely find it very, very interesting what you were saying about Russia today and how leftists in the United States or Europe seem to get on board with those positions. For example, there's a Marxist-Leninist blog called Critique of Crisis Theory that essentially said that it was all just the troop buildups on the Ukrainian border. Nothing was going to come of it. All of this right before the special military operation, and then this happened. So the question of how they come to these ideas, why they're coming to these ideas that are sort of in lockstep with whatever, the Russian government is supporting, that's another discussion entirely. But very interesting nonetheless. Do you have anything else you want to talk about on this particular question?
So you want to know about how they justify those events?
Yes, I think that would be an interesting point to discuss.
Got it. Well, I actually have some words to say. As I mentioned before, it's a well-known historical problem. The Russian government basically claims that Ukraine doesn't exist. Ukrainians doesn't exist as a nation. They are Russians. They are just corrupted, starting with Germans. It's a well-known historical myth that Austro-Hungarians invented Ukrainians to create some evil Russians opposing Russia. And in his speech on February 24, Putin also claimed that it was Bolshevik Party that created Ukraine, and he literally said, "Well, you're decommunizing. All right, we can decommunize you." So yeah, that's another sign. They're making all those events under the slogan of decommunization of Ukraine. However, a lot of things were spoken, were said about Bolsheviks creating Ukraine, about Bolsheviks making Ukraine strong, about Bolsheviks giving them natural Russian lands. And well, for people who live in Russia, especially for those who know a lot about the history of the Second World War, about how it started, it looks, I would say, kind of suspicious, because it's not difficult to understand who was another leader back in the 20th century who said, we're surrounded by enemies, we have people living in neighbor countries who are just like our people, but they are corrupted by evil this or evil that, and we need to liberate them. We need to annex those countries in order to unify our nation and make it strong.
Understood.
Yeah, I hope our audience understood as well. And another thing is those symbols. They were used by the Russian army during the first period. Those letters V and Z. And they quickly became popularized by the Russian government. However, they did not consider one fact, that this letter Z, it looks very close to one Nazi symbol used by SS. Those this organization back in Nazi Germany.
Right.
And they use those symbols everywhere. They show them in administrations, like local governments. The governor of Kuznetsk region in Siberia, in Altai, even stated that it's now allowed to write the word Kuzbas, like Kuznetsk basin, with Latin Z, in order to support this special military operation. They are allowed to arrest you if you do anything bad to those symbols. There were a lot of news about youngsters demolishing those symbols, standing on the streets, and of course they got arrested. And in general, well, in my opinion, it's a bit difficult. It's a bit tough to hear all those lies, all those myths and falsifications, falsifies, I guess, like for almost 3 months, even 4 months. It's very difficult. I guess now it's a bit easier because the strongest part, in my opinion, was March, when it all started. When it was really a big psychological effect, when there is a war in literally several regions from where you live, when there are bombings and shootings in neighbor regions, when there are news every day about those men died, those cities are under fire, those villages were occupied or liberated, so-called. All those things, they really do a lot of harm to your psychological health.
Of course. And just for the Western audience and even myself, can you sort of explain what forces were used over in Ukraine? And by that, I mean, like, was it just the standing army, or was there any sort of conscription of, drafting just Russian citizens to engage in the special military operation?
Yes, the Russian government announced that they are not going to use recruits in this operation. They're going to use those who signed the contract, so professional military. However, well, there was a sad story about it on 8th of March, International Women's Day. Putin said, Russian mothers, don't worry, we will not send your sons in there. And on the next day, the Ministry of Defense literally made an announcement where they said, well, actually there were recruits in Ukraine, but it's not our fault. It's the fault of local commanders. We will punish them, so don't worry.
Mm-hmm.
However, there was a case with this Moscow cruiser. Maybe you heard, our audience heard, when it got sunk because it was destroyed probably by the Ukrainian missile. And the story with this cruiser is that firstly, the Russian government said it did not happen. Like, it's all Ukrainian neo-Nazi fake news. It's actually alive. Then they said, well, there was a blowout in this cruiser, but don't worry, everything is under control. And then they were forced to state, well, this ship sunk. And it's not the end of the story, because turned out there were recruits. The sailors recruited. They were on this ship, and their parents started to worry. They started sending the commanders of this ship messages in WhatsApp, asking what's with their sons, what's with their children, and commanders replied, everything is okay. Then they basically started ignoring, and then turned out the whole crew is dead, except for the leading staff, of course, because they evacuated first.
Got it.
Mm-hmm. There are also a lot of talks about the amount of losses, like how many soldiers did Russia lost there. And the fact that the last official statement was about how many soldiers are dead was made at the end of March, and literally nothing after this date. It gives a lot of questions. Another funny thing is that the press secretary of the Russian president, Peskov, he gave an interview to one of the British, if I remember correctly, British mass media, and he said, we had very heavy losses there, and he was not punished. And if an ordinary man in Russia asks about losses, he's going to be arrested for literally writing a comment in Russian Contact network. There were cases, there were news about such things, and as you know, what's not allowed for the ordinary Russian citizen is allowed for the representative of the Russian political establishment.
Terrible.
Well, I know some people from there, standing there, and it's basically war, and all those things related to wars, they all happen there. Robbing, stealing things, destroying, killing people. It all exists. It's all there. And for me, when the government says, like, we're liberating this, we're liberating that, I just remember that there are neo-Nazis fighting on both Ukrainian and Russian side. Of course it's good when they kill each other. However, it's the ordinary people that are affected with those things. It's them who get their homes lost, who get their houses destroyed. You could see those photos from Mariupol. It's basically destroyed. It's devastated city, and it's not just city but also industrial sector. This Azovstal buildings. It's industrial zone, and it's where people were working. They got their jobs. Of course, now they have no jobs. They're not working there. There are no people living in this district, and it's going to take a while to restore it all. And firstly, when a lot of people asked what should be the opinion on the conflict, as for me, I like to quote one famous Soviet politician, Gromyko. He was a Ministry of Foreign Relations in 1960s, 1970s. He was well known in the West, and he once said, it's better to negotiate for 10 years than to fight for one day. And I guess that's the main thing here, because, anything could happen during this period. However, if it was peace, then all those people could stay in their homes, in their houses. They could live their ordinary lives, and now it's all ruined. And it's not only about Ukrainians. It's about Russians because they're affected. It's about Europeans because those prices. It's even about Americans because, as far as I know, oil prices are growing, and
Correct.
Yeah, it affects the pockets of the ordinary Americans.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you very, very much for such a detailed response. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about on this question, or comfortable moving on to another question?
Well, I have a few words about our chat. I see a lot of people messaging things. However, I would like you to ask your questions using the link. And a few seconds. Yeah, the link is in the chat. So if you want any question to be answered right now, you can do it. Now, let's go on, I guess.
Alrighty. So next thing I wanted to touch on with you, Vasily. So for the Western audience, may not be able to access or read this information. Can you just sort of talk about what the major communist organizations, major left-wing organizations, or even just bloggers who are having commentary about the special military operations. What positions are they holding? Are they conforming to the position, and the propaganda that's being put out by the state? Are they against it? Is there any general consensus? Is there controversy? Can you just sort of speak to those questions?
Yes, it's one of the most important questions, I think, because a lot of people think, well, I see abroad and in Russia as well, that there are neo-Nazis in the Ukraine, and therefore Russia is already more progressive. However, it's not true. I've mentioned it before. There are neo-Nazis in Russia. There are neo-Nazis in the Russian army, and they're literally fighting right now there. As for the Russian communist movement, well, it was obvious that there is going to be a split. The currently existing the so-called official party, the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, of course, they supported the government because they're paid by the government. They're the part of the political establishment. They're the part of the Russian political system. They're unironically being funded from the state budget. What are we talking about? This party, which is not a communist party, is filled with feds. It has capitalists in its ranks, and it's selling deputy chairs in the parliament, in the Russian parliament and regional parliaments. So, of course, they support it. It's like, yes, there are neo-Nazis in Ukraine, so we need to fight against them. This position was supported by the so-called Russian Communist Workers' Party. This party was well known as alternative for CPRF. It was supported by the Communist Party of Greece. It's a member of different groups, international groups of International Meeting of Communist and Workers' Parties, led by CPG. And they also supported this conflict. Well, they were stating that it's bad, Russia is capitalist. However, there is a just beginning in this war, and what they are doing is they say Russia is not imperialist, and well, there are no Nazis in Ukraine, so it's better for the Russian capitalism to fight against them. However, this position was denounced by the Communist Party of Greece and the Communist Party of Turkey in their well-known joint statement, No to Imperialist War in Ukraine. They published it almost immediately on February 24th, and so did Ballesturm. We also denounced this conflict as the imperialist war, and we actually have an article where we show what are the primary economic goals of Russian capital in Ukraine. For example, it turned out that before 2014, Russia was the main state for Ukraine to give them credits, to give them money, basically. And it's obvious the Russian capitalists lost their markets, they lost their Ukrainian market, and they wanted to get it back somehow. That's why they supported those so-called People's Republics. They wanted to... It's basically one of the goals of what they do today. Yeah, I see. There is a comment in the chat. Putin would make Russia into the new USA if he could. Make no mistake. Well, that's actually true. They want to have great, strong Russia, but it means they want to have such ambitions and such influence as the United States, and they actually have them. Russian capital expands in Syria, it expands in Central Africa, in Venezuela, in Latin America. For example, just recently there was a St. Petersburg International Economic Forum where there were delegates from Afghanistan, Islamists, Taliban, those ultra-reactionary religious fanatics, and the Russian government finds it okay to communicate with them, to make trading deals with them. They announced that there are going to be different agreements on exporting Afghan oil, Afghan wood, and all other resources in Russia. So yes, Russian capital has its own ambitions. It has its own economic expansion, and it's imperialist as well. So those people who say that Russia is good just because it's fighting NATO, well, it's not so. It's wrong. When you support capitalist Russia, you support basically another US, another USA.
Very interesting. Thanks, Vasily. While you were talking about that, one thing I was thinking of is, knowing the history of the Russian section of Polichtstorm, they had a long polemic against Professor Popov.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's Popov.
Do you think he laid any sort of ideological groundwork? He had long argued that Russia's not imperialist. Do you think that his views are, sort of laid the ideological foundation that, the current government is using to support their current actions?
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's a good question to talk about. There were attempts, and there are attempts to justify the Russia's place as not imperialist state, and therefore to make it progressive. And those claims were made in 2017, 2018, years before this conflict. Yes, Russian section had a series of materials against the so-called Workers' Party of Russia and its leader, Professor Mikhail Popov, who was claiming that Russia is progressive because it's not imperialist. And it's not imperialist because there are no financial capitals in Russia. He says, well, you see those banks in Russia, they're not banks, they're actually just like in medieval times. Those, let me translate. Money lenders. They're just money lenders because their percents are huge, and it doesn't allow Russia to prosper in economic sphere. So there are no actual banks. It means there is no financial capital, and therefore Russia is not imperialist, because according to Lenin, if it's imperialism, then there should be a financial capital, and financial capital is a combination of bank and industry. So there was a foundation laid in the theoretical sphere to defend those social chauvinist, I would say, views of Russia opposing unipolar world, claiming that Russia is progressive and therefore it should be supported. And of course, Russian leftists and Western as well, some of them fell for that thing. I can understand them because, the United States, NATO, those imperial states, imperialist organizations, they're widely known across the world. And of course, a lot of people would like to hear that there are some good guys who are actually fighting the bad ones. They think good guys are Russia and China because, for Russia, they think Russia is progressive because Russia was Soviet Union was the Soviet Union in the past, and they think there is something left of the Soviet Union in Russia. However, don't be misunderstood. Those people in the Russian leadership right now, it's those people who actually destroyed the Soviet Union. For example, Putin was in Leningrad's government, regional government, and he was basically selling the lands in Leningrad region to the German companies. And he and his group mates, they made their money during 90s when the existing Russian government actually stole all the lands, all the industry that was created by the Soviet people, that was created by people, and they privatized it. They made it property for a bunch of businessmen. That's how they created capitalism there. And yes, it's just as imperialist as the other ones. They also have their interests. They also want to expand. They also want to have their place under the sun. So, well, I told about it before, and I want to say it once again, is that, well, those people in the West who think that Russia is progressive, that Russian capitalists are better, no, they're not. They're promoting religious fascism. Putin, for example, is supporting well, Russian fascist philosopher named Ilyin. And this Ilyin wrote back in 1940s that Nazis rose as direction against Bolshevism, and he wrote, "It's good." And this guy is adored by Putin. He also made a lot of things to glorify the White Guards, the well-known counter-revolutionaries in the Russian Civil War, who, well, some of them later escaped to Germany and became Nazis. And even those people were glorified. And, well, if Russia is going to defeat USA, like, just imagine, it's not going to be better. Like, we have one aggressive imperialism, and then we're gonna have another one with religion, with Orthodox Church, with actual neo-Nazis. Like, there were photos of American neo-Nazis in Iraq, I guess. You know, those American troops posing with SS flag, and there are actually Russian ones.
Got it. Very interesting. I think the main argument that they would make in saying that Russia is progressive is that they're opposing unilateral, or whatever term you want to use to describe the current, state of global politics. They'll just say, the U.S. is imperialist. There's this thing called the unified global world order, and Russia is opposing that, and that it's progressive. But I mean, you're very well versed in history, Vasily. I think you know that there were periods in world history when there were multiple countries vying for global supremacy, like World War I. Not a very peaceful time. So yeah, that's all I really wanted to say. Do you have anything else you want to talk about, Vasily? Any other points or comments?
Well, we have, as I see, some questions more, so let's go on.
All right. So, next question. So, this is sort of along the same lines as the last one, so there's going to be a little bit of overlap here, but common argument surrounding the special military operation is that communists should stand behind the positions of the existing party in Russia. As an American, we don't have any educated things that we can speak about. We should leave this to the Russian communists, predominantly the CPRF. Can you explain whether this position is logical? Does it conform to, your own personal views? Does it make sense?
Yes, I've actually seen a lot of arguments from the people from the West. They say, look, CPRF is the second biggest party in the country. They're probably doing well. However, it's not so, and CPRF has nothing to do with the real Communist Party, and unfortunately, that's where we, as the Russian communists, have a lot of things to do, because well, I know there are a lot of people who in Russia who they don't like the existing order. They want to change it. They know that there was the big Soviet Union. It was great. Everything was good there. Of course, it's not, and they want to make their life better. So without the real organization, they go into CPRF, and they fall for opportunist policies. They fall for typical bourgeois political corruption, all those things, bribery, all those bad things that are elements of the capitalist political system. And for the Russian communists, the primary task, in my opinion, is creating such an organization that can call itself a real communist party, that can be like a Bolshevik party. It was not invented by Lenin. It has some principles that stood the test of time, how it should work, what principles it should be based on, and of course the existing party is not the Bolshevik party. It has nationalists in its ranks, those people who, support communists not because they're communists, but because they made Russia great. And those people, they can support nationalists, they can support even reactionaries as well, because they make Russia great, so why not? That's their logic. And
yeah, not too dissimilar from the Trump slogan.
Yes, that's where reactionaries and those pseudo-communists get together. There are attempts to, it's well known that there is no communist party in Russia today, because none of the existing organizations can be called a communist party. Well, CPRF, a lot of words were already spoken about that. Russian Communist Workers' Party, RCWP, it's not. It has similar nationalists in its ranks. It supports those imperialist ambitions of the Russian government, and actually tries to hide them under the slogan, there is a just part in that conflict. There was an attempt from several petty bourgeois left radicals and Trotskyists to create the so-called Union of Marxists. Trotskyists don't like to name themselves Marxist-Leninists, because in their opinion, Marxism-Leninism is Stalinism. They like to call themselves revolutionary socialists, socialist workers, Marxists, of course not Marxist-Leninists. And they were petty bourgeois people from different so-called socialist organizations like Socialist Alternative, which is another Trotskyist international, who tried to make an organization, and they actually made. There is an organization called the Union of Marxists. It's a broad left organization which positions itself as the party of your dreams. Like they literally have this slogan in their Vkontakte page. However, this organization is far from being a communist party. And firstly, they are based on their organization is based around the same principles that are used for German Die Linke and British Labour Party, where they don't have a single unified organization. They have different platforms, different splits, different groups who act in one organization just technically, and they communicate with each other, and they make the whole politics out of this thing. Of course, it's not a Marxist-Leninist approach. The Communist Party, in our opinion, should be unified, should be single, should be created according to the principles of democratic centralism, and it should be able to act as one. You cannot be a member of the Communist Party and be a member of this or that split or another organization. It makes it parallel. It doesn't work like that. And Bolsheviks were actually against that. Recently, I've been reading Lenin's What is to be Done, and there are a lot of things which I can name based in modern words. I see that Lenin's analysis of how the organization should be built, of how it should be, of what principles it should be based on, it can be applied to the modern situation as well. And that's what we need. Well, if the Russian communists want to act good, to do things to influence the Russian political sphere, they need an organization. And in order to have an organization, they need to have a good theory. And of course, this theory should be not revisionist things, not opportunist things, but Marxist-Leninist theory.
Excellent. Thanks, Vasily.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So a lot of the other questions that we have, you've sort of elaborated on up to this point and spoken. So I think we can move on to another question that maybe we haven't spoken about in depth here.
Mm-hmm.
So one that I want to talk about now. So there's been recent news. This comes up in the New York Times or other Western news outlets. Vladimir Putin's comparing himself to Peter the Great. For those of us with a limited understanding of Russian history, can you just go into some detail, just a brief summary, who he was, and why is Putin comparing himself to this person based on current situation?
Can you repeat?
Yeah. So in the news here, there's a lot of articles that are coming out. Putin's comparing himself to, Peter the Great or other historical Russian figures you can think of. Can you just sort of explain why he's doing that? Who Peter the Great was? Why would Putin compare himself to that figure?
Yeah, that's an interesting topic because the Russian president likes to use a lot of people from the past. Modern Russia has very few things to be proud of. Actually, the theme of death, I would say, is one of the main pillars of the Russian modern culture. Things that were destroyed, like there was Soviet Union, everything was great, but then came the Russian Federation, 90s, bad 90s as they are called in Russian, and everything became dead. Cities became dead, villages became dead, people were living those places. There are a lot of abandoned places in Russia. There are literally empty cities. This atmosphere that, I guess it's one of the things why such game as Stalker got popular in Russia and in the former Soviet countries, because it depicts how you see those things in game, like abandoned villages, empty buildings, factories, and Russians are actually living there. They live among those empty villages and buildings. And the Russian government is forced to appeal to the ghosts of the past. They're well known for their usage of the Soviet symbols of the memory of the Soviet soldiers who died during the Great Patriotic War, and it's very, I would like to say, symbolic that those people who say we will remember their honor and those brave words, they say it under this exact flag that was used by the Russian collaborators during the Second World War, by those who supported Nazi Germany. And this flag is now waving above Kremlin, where was the red flag and there were stars. And Lenin's mausoleum is being hidden by different wooden stuff every 9th of May. Russian government doesn't like to mention that they were communists, they were good. It was them who actually made the whole victory possible, victory over Nazis. And they like to say about unifying the nation, unifying the people around their national ideals. They say the Great Patriotic War is our national memory, national ideal, and all those things. And they also like to appeal to the Russian Empire. They think of it as this great past, which actually never existed in reality. In reality, Russian Empire was one of the weakest states, like the so-called great states, great powers, of its period. It was basically a puppet of France, Belgium, and Great Britain because it was tightly connected financially. France was one of the main creditors of Russian Empire, and no wonder Russian Empire entered the World War I on the Entente side, because, well, they got paid for that. So Russian Empire is glorified in modern Russia. Government makes monuments, makes different things to praise this great time, which was evilly destroyed by the bloody Bolsheviks. And they like to appeal to Peter the Great. And I think a few words need to be said about this guy. Peter the Great, or Peter the First, is a well-known Russian Tsar. He was actually the one who made Russian Tsardom an empire. He's well known for his reforms, which made Russia kind of westernized. Before Peter the First, Russia was a very outdated state, and then in several decades it defeated Sweden. This Carolus Rex, Charles the 12th, which was his army was one of the most powerful in Europe. Peter the First defeated and almost captured the Swedish king as his prisoner of war during the Battle of Poltava. So Peter the Great is well known for his reforms and, well, actually for being a very bloody emperor, because he spent a lot of lives for doing all the stuff he wanted to do, like to build a city on a swamp, on literally swamp. That's how St. Petersburg was built. To create fleet, to create a Russian army. Yes, he is well known for his actions that made Russia a great power, and that's why Putin appeals to him. Peter the First captured the coast of the Baltic Sea, and he attempted to capture the coast of the Black Sea. However, it was not successful. However, he was reclaiming those lands because Russian Tsardom had the Baltic coast in as its territory back in 15th century. However, later, during Ivan the Terrible's reign, they were annexed by Sweden and Denmark. And Peter the Great was returning them. And that's why Putin says, like, we're not invading, we're actually reclaiming what's ours. You know, it also looks very similar to one dictator from 1930s, 1940s, who said, we're reclaiming what's ours. Yeah, he reclaimed that in Austria, in Czechoslovakia, in Poland, and France, literally everywhere, until he got beaten in 1945.
Right. All right. Well, thank you, Vasily. That was enlightening. Very historical.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to pivot and just ask you a question of a more personal nature, something that's more tied to your daily life.
Mm-hmm.
We all know that at the beginning of the special military operation, as it was called, there was some destabilization of the ruble, inflation, interest rates were, jacked up by the central bank in Russia, and it seems to have somewhat stabilized since that point. Given all of that, can you just talk about how your own daily life has changed as a result of the special military operation in Ukraine?
Mm-hmm. So, one of the most important things, the prices, they grow, and they grow fast. Some of the goods, they have prices doubled, even tripled, I would say. It's affected in every sphere, starting with food products, vegetables, food, snacks, meat, and ending with electronics. Some of them became unavailable because, well, sanctions. They try to organize what they call a parallel import. However, recently I've seen news about Samsung smartphones parallel imported to Russia not being not functioning because they require a SIM card from the country they were imported in the first place. It makes them not working in Russia. Prices on electronics grew. They more than doubled. For example, I wanted to buy 1 terabyte HDD back in the beginning of February. It cost around 3,500 rubles. After the escalation of the Russian-Ukraine crisis in late February and March, the price was about 7,000. Like, it doubled. And well, it's electronics. Okay, you can live without 1 terabyte HDD, but what about food? And that's where it became, well, it makes a lot of harm. The thing is that prices grew on, as I mentioned, on meat, on vegetables, on food in general, even on such thing as bread. And, bread for a lot of Russians, it's something. Well, it requires bread to have a good life. You don't have a good life if you don't have a good bread. And well, I was buying a good bread for about 30 or 40 rubles for 1 loaf, and now I cannot find a good bread for 40 rubles. It costs 50 or 60 rubles. And it's a great deal. The same thing applies to different snacks. Well, all right, you can live without chips, but well, it's okay for every human to. I don't want to cook something. I want to eat food that's ready. I want to order pizza, rolls, something like that, and it's fine. But the price. Previously, I could pay 200 or 300 rubles for pizza, for example. Now I cannot afford it because it's 500, 600. I don't have a lot of money. I better buy potatoes, some chicken meat, and make something by myself. Of course, it requires time, but it's cheap. And well, the prices, for example, for chocolate, they're rising, and it's not they're just rising. Those who produce chocolate in Russia, they like to cut the portions. Like you buy one chocolate which has, for example, 100 gram of chocolate in it, and now it's the same price, but you buy, it's not 100 grams, but it's 85 grams, 80 grams. It's annoying.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, we obviously have inflation in the U.S. as well, and it's persisted for some time. But it's an interesting point that they can just reduce the, physical amount of the commodity that they're supplying instead of just increasing the price on it, which is effectively just increasing the price per unit, per gram or however you're measuring it.
Yes, and well, actually, I have one thing to add. Firstly, all those things were justified by the government, by its officials. They said, well, what do you want? You see, the exchange rate has dropped. We have 100 rubles for $1. What do you expect? But when it came back, and even further, for example, right now, we have, let me see, we have 56 rubles for $1. It's like it was back in 2017 or 18. So what they wanted is like exchange rate like in 2017, 2018, and prices like in 2017 and 2018. But what the broad Russian masses received is prices from 2022 and exchange rate from 2017, 2018. And yeah, by the way, Russian citizens are not allowed to buy dollars or euro and to sell them as well. Well, yes, they can sell, but they cannot buy them. So this exchange rate makes no sense for the Russian people right now. And those prices, as I said, they're the same, they're higher. So the capitalists are making profits from them already. That's one of the goals of what's happening right now, I guess. Rich people became richer and poor people became poorer.
I mean, it's unsurprising that the brunt of the special military operation is being pushed onto just average, everyday people, whether they're paying for it when they buy or with their lives, literally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, by the way, I see there is one donation with the question, what do you say to the comparison of the Ukraine situation today to the civil war period there and comparisons to the history of the USSR in general? Well, firstly, thank you for your support. And yes, there are... it's actually used even in the Russian propaganda. For example, recently I heard one talking head on Russian radio saying that, it's like in the Civil War, but it's about us being Reds and those Ukrainian neo-Nazis being Whites. And it said about this exact government that praises Whites and hates Reds, labels them as national betrayers, national traitors. That's how they call Bolsheviks. So I think this comparison makes no sense. It's a different situation. During the Civil War in Russia period, we had an ironically good side. It was Bolsheviks. It was Soviet Russia. It was the representative of the broad masses, of the workers and peasants. And we had all this garbage, all this counter-revolutionary rubbish on the other side. Those white guards, those Ukrainian nationalists. And now they're fighting, they're fighting each other, but they're using the broad masses of the people. They brainwash them. They force them to fight against each other with for the sake of profits, for the sake of expanding economic markets, raw materials, labor markets, those things. And of course, they use this nationalist, social chauvinist hysteria. They actually use it to make people forget about the Soviet past, the Soviet legacy. In Ukraine, it's more obvious. You know, they have a reactionary regime, which has, well, yes, it has neo-Nazis. They adopt laws to ban all the Soviet things and even Russian ones. However, in Russia, it didn't require laws to make anti-Soviet things. Like, if they wanted to have this or that monument or Soviet museum demolished, destroyed, they could just left it without any funds, and it became destroyed. Or destroy them under the slogan of reconstructing. That's how they rebuilt several monuments into like glorifying the Russian Empire period. So those comparisons, they're wrong, and to the history of the USSR, they don't have any connection. Yes, they like the Russian government, as I mentioned already, likes to point on the thing that Bolsheviks gave lands to Ukraine. However, it was Soviet Ukraine, and yes, it was important for the Soviet Ukraine because there were Ukrainians living there. And yes, I just remembered one of the things they say that it's not Russian government, it's the Bolsheviks who caused this modern conflict to exist. That's nonsense. That's one of the things that make me furious, because the Russian government tries to place all the faults on the heads of the dead Soviet people. Of course, the Soviet Union doesn't exist. It cannot reply, you know. However, it's up to communists to defend the Soviet legacy, and there I can say that just like the modern Russia has nothing to do with the Soviet Russia, the modern Ukraine has nothing to do with the Soviet Ukraine as well. They're different states, and both sides are opposing their Soviet past.
Thank you, Vasily. All right, so I want to ask a question about where you see things going, just given where we stand right now. Back at the beginning of the stream, I know you mentioned that there's conflicts in the Donbass region, specifically now in Severodonetsk. The U.S. has been, and other European allies, funding the Ukrainians, assisting them in whatever ways possible. Given where things are at right now, where do you see this special military operation going, if anywhere, in the next 4 months or next year?
Yes, so firstly, I thought it's going to be like a blitzkrieg, and I told you already what it was about, like getting Kiev, the government collapsing, establishing a pro-Russian puppet regime, and quickly ending all the conflict. However, now it seems that it's going to be here for at least several months. We see attempts to take those Ukrainian lands that are claimed by People's Republics, to get some lands from Ukraine itself, like Kherson and Zaporozhye. And I'm afraid this region is going to turn in one big Donbass for several years, because the amount of destruction, it's immeasurable. Billions and trillions of dollars are going to be required to rebuild all the things that were destroyed. Yeah, I see. There is a guy in the chat claiming that Russia never intended to take Kiev. Yeah, it never intended to take Kiev, but it attempted to do it in the late February and early March. They didn't succeed and they retreat. So they're going to take the lands in the eastern Ukraine, and well, they say they are not trading prisoners of war. However, there were news from Ukraine that some of the people from Azov battalion that were captured by the Russian army, they basically got back to Ukraine. So I think they actually made such an agreement. Of course, it's not official, like they're not announcing it in mass media. However, when it comes to agreements, they were actually communicating really well. For example, when there were talks in Istanbul, I guess, in Turkey, maybe you remember it was March and April, where Russia and Ukraine negotiate about this situation. The things that Russia wanted to take is to make Ukraine demilitarized. Of course, no words about denazification, no more, and forcing Ukraine to accept Crimea and Donetsk and Luhansk regions being independent. As I mentioned, their interests, it's not like those people sitting in the government, they're not big brains. They're just like all the people. They have plans, they think this can work, that can work. Well, if it doesn't work, they will change it. And for the one big thing for this operation being unsuccessful for them, I think it's due to the traditional Russian trait. It's called bribery. They have probably billions of rubles spent, and I think the most part is in the pockets of Russian officials, of big military commanders. So what's going to happen in the next months? Now they got Mariupol, they're going to take Severodonetsk probably, and they're going to establish their control in the whole of Zaporozhye region, because, well, they have the whole of Kherson region and only half of Zaporozhye. And Zaporozhye is what connects Kherson to Donetsk. So they definitely want to take that.
Got it. Thank you. I really don't have any other questions, Vasily. Is there anything in chat or any questions you'd like to have Vasily answer?
Well, we're streaming for an hour and a half, and actually that's the time we usually do when we stream in the Russian section of YouTube. It's our first stream for the Western audience, and well, I thought there would be fewer people, but we had like 30 people online. Now it's 24. Yeah, could Russia become NATO or US allied? Well, it technically it could. There was an opportunity for the Russian establishment in 90s to become like all the other former Soviet countries, capitalist governments. They accepted the US, became friends with Europe and all that stuff. However, well, it turned out they want to get profits on their own, not be a puppet of the United States. But they just want to be another United States, to have profits, to impose their rules, their will on the rest of the world, and that's it. Well, I guess that's it for now.
Alrighty. Well, as we come to the conclusion of the stream, I'd like to again thank Vasily for taking the time to answer our questions. Thank you to all of our listeners who joined us today. We hope that this discussion helped answer some common questions from a Marxist-Leninist position. Feel free to leave any comments, subscribe if you wish. Thank you guys, and have a great day. Till next time.
Большое спасибо всем товарищам, кто пришел к нам сегодня. Thank you and goodbye.